Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Discovery and watched the stars through the main screen. His ship had been traveling for 3 months now, moving deeper into space than any human had gone before. The Discovery was not the biggest ship in Earth's fleet, but it was fast and well-equipped for exploration missions like this one. Jake had been a space captain for 15 years, but this mission felt different. They were heading toward a system that Earth's telescopes had been watching for a long time, a place where strange signals had been detected. Lisa Parker worked in the engine room below, making sure everything ran smoothly. She was the best engineer Jake had ever worked with, always finding ways to fix problems that seemed impossible. Danny Rodriguez sat at the communications station, listening for any signals from space while keeping contact with Earth. Amanda Clark was busy at her science station, studying the readings from their sensors as they got closer to their destination. The Kepler 442 system had always been interesting to Earth scientists. It had planets that might support life, and recent scans had shown unusual energy readings. The mission was simple: get close enough to take detailed scans and see what was out there. No one expected to find anything dangerous. Humans had been exploring space for decades and had never met another intelligent species. Jake was looking at the navigation display when Amanda suddenly called out from her station. Her voice was excited but also worried. She had found something big on the sensors, something that was not supposed to be there. The readings showed massive objects moving in space near the 4th planet of the system. These objects were too big to be asteroids and too organized to be natural. Danny quickly adjusted his equipment to get a better look. What he saw on his screen made him take a deep breath. There were ships out there, but not human ships. These vessels were huge, each one at least 10 times bigger than the Discovery. They had a strange design that looked nothing like anything humans had ever built. The ships were arranged in a perfect formation, like they were waiting for something. Lisa came up from the engine room when she heard the excitement on the bridge. She looked at the screen and whistled softly. The alien ships were beautiful in a frightening way. They were long and curved, with surfaces that seemed to glow with their own light. There were at least 50 of them floating in space like sleeping giants. Jake ordered Danny to try making contact. Danny sent out standard greeting messages in every language and mathematical sequence that Earth had prepared for first contact. For several minutes, there was no response. Then suddenly, the alien ships began to move. They turned toward the Discovery like they had been aware of the human ship all along. The largest alien vessel, which was bigger than a city, moved closer to the Discovery. Jake could see details on its surface now, strange symbols and patterns that seemed to shift and change as he watched. The ship stopped about 1 kilometer away, close enough that it filled most of the main screen. Then Danny's equipment came alive with an incoming signal. The aliens were trying to communicate. The message came through in perfect English, which surprised everyone on the bridge. The voice was deep and cold, speaking with authority that made Jake feel small. The alien speaker identified himself as Admiral Kextal of the Zephyrian hegemony. He said that humans had entered space that belonged to the hegemony and that they were not welcome. The Admiral's words were polite but firm, like a teacher scolding a child who had wandered into the wrong classroom. Admiral Kextal explained that the Zephyrian hegemony had been watching Earth for a long time. They knew about human technology and human behavior. The Admiral said that humans were too primitive and violent to join the galactic community. He told Jake that humanity must stay in their own solar system and stop all deep space exploration immediately. Jake tried to respond, to explain that humans came in peace and only wanted to explore and learn, but Admiral Kextal cut him off. The alien leader said that humans had 1 galactic year to withdraw all their ships and stations from deep space. Any human vessels found outside their solar system after that time would be destroyed without warning. 2. Show that this was not an empty threat, the alien ships demonstrated their power. Without any visible weapons firing, the Discovery suddenly lost all power. The lights went out, the engines stopped, and even the artificial gravity failed. Jake and his crew floated helplessly in the dark while emergency lights slowly came on. Amanda's science equipment was the first thing to come back online. Her readings showed that the aliens had used some kind of energy field to shut down every system on the Discovery. It was technology far beyond anything humans possessed. The aliens could have destroyed the ship easily, but they chose only to disable it as a warning. Admiral Kextal's voice came through the speakers again. He said that this was just a small example of Zephyrian power. He told Jake to take this message back to Earth and make sure that human leaders understood the situation. The hegemony had been ruling this part of the galaxy for 10,000 years, and they would not allow a young and dangerous species like humanity to threaten the peace. The alien fleet began to move away, but Admiral Kextal had one final message. He said that the hegemony had studied human history and seen nothing but war and destruction. Humans fought each other constantly and destroyed their own planet's environment. They were not ready to meet other intelligent species, and they might never be ready. As the alien ships disappeared into the distance, Jake and his crew worked frantically to repair their vessel. Lisa managed to get the engines working again, but many systems were still damaged. It would take days to make all the repairs needed to get home safely. During the long journey back to Earth, Jake thought about everything that had happened. The aliens had been polite, but absolutely clear about their intentions. They saw humans as children playing with dangerous toys, and they were not going to allow those children to leave their room. When the Discovery finally reached Earth, Jake's report caused chaos in government buildings around the world. President Catherine Wells called emergency meetings with leaders from every nation. General Paul Hudson wanted to start building weapons immediately, while Chief Diplomat Nicole Foster thought they should try to negotiate with the aliens. The news could not be kept secret for long. Soon every person on Earth knew that humanity was not alone in the universe, and that their new neighbors did not want them around. Some people were afraid, others were angry, but most were simply shocked by the idea that humans might not be free to explore the stars. Jake Morrison had spent his whole life dreaming of finding other intelligent life in the universe. Now that dream had come true, but it was nothing like what he had expected. The aliens were not friends or teachers or even neutral observers. They were rulers who saw humans as a problem that needed to be controlled. The Discovery sat in Earth orbit while repairs continued. But Jake knew that everything had changed. Humanity had learned that they lived in a universe where they were not welcome, where powerful forces wanted to keep them trapped in their own small corner of space. The question now was what humans would do about it. President Catherine Wells stood before the United Nations Assembly Hall, looking out at representatives from every nation on Earth. The hall was packed with people who had come to hear humanity's response to the alien ultimatum. News cameras from around the world focused on her as she prepared to speak words that would shape the future of the human race. Catherine had been president for only 2 years, but she had already faced many challenges. Nothing had prepared her for this moment when she had to decide whether humanity would bow to alien demands or fight for their freedom to explore the stars. She took a deep breath and began to speak in a voice that was calm, but filled with determination. She told the assembly that humanity would not accept the Zephyrian ultimatum. Humans had always been explorers, she said, from the first people who crossed oceans to the astronauts who walked on the moon. No alien empire, no matter how powerful, would stop humanity from reaching for the stars. The hall erupted in applause. But Catherine knew that words alone would not be enough. She announced the Prometheus Initiative, a massive project that would unite all of Earth's resources and knowledge. Every nation would contribute their best scientists, engineers, and military experts to prepare for what might come. The goal was simple but enormous: to advance human technology fast enough to defend Earth and protect humanity's right to explore space. Dr. Ryan Mitchell was chosen to lead the scientific part of the project. He was a brilliant physicist who had been working on advanced propulsion systems before the alien contact. Now he had access to unlimited funding and the best minds on Earth. His first task was to study the data from the Discovery's encounter and figure out how the aliens had disabled the ship so easily. Ryan worked with engineer Sophie Grant, who specialized in spacecraft design. Sophie had built some of the fastest ships in Earth's fleet, but she knew that speed alone would not be enough against alien technology. They needed to understand how the Zephyrian energy weapons worked and find ways to defend against them. Data from Amanda Clark's science station gave them their first clues. The aliens had used some kind of electromagnetic pulse that was far more sophisticated than anything humans had developed. But Sophie noticed something interesting in the readings. The alien weapons seemed to target specific frequencies that human technology used. If they could change those frequencies or shield against them, they might be able to resist alien attacks. Meanwhile, Commander Alex Turner was put in charge of building Earth's new defense fleet. Alex had been a military officer for 20 years and had commanded ships in several conflicts between Earth nations. But those conflicts seemed small compared to what humanity might face against the Zephyrian hegemony. Alex's job was to take every available spacecraft and turn them into warships. Civilian cargo vessels, research ships, even luxury cruise liners were brought to orbital shipyards around Earth and Mars. Teams of workers labored around the clock to install weapons, armor, and the new defensive systems that Ryan and Sophie were developing. The work was dangerous and exhausting. Many of the civilian ships were not designed for combat, and converting them required major changes to their structure. Some ships were too small or too old to be useful, but Alex refused to waste anything that could potentially help defend Earth. Captain Jake Morrison and his crew were given a special mission. While the Discovery was being repaired and upgraded, they were sent out in a smaller, stealthier ship to gather intelligence on the Zephyrian fleet. This was incredibly dangerous work, but Jake volunteered because he felt responsible for bringing the alien threat to Earth's attention. The reconnaissance missions took Jake's team to the edge of the solar system, where they used advanced sensors to watch the alien ships from a safe distance. What they discovered was both encouraging and frightening. The Zephyrian fleet was enormous, with hundreds of ships that each carried enough firepower to destroy a planet. But Jake noticed that the aliens seemed to follow very predictable patterns in their movements and formations. Lisa Parker, who had joined Jake's reconnaissance team, studied the alien ship designs and made an important discovery. The Zephyrian vessels were incredibly advanced, but they appeared to be built for intimidation and overwhelming force rather than for prolonged battles. Their weapons were devastatingly powerful, but their defenses seemed designed to stop primitive attacks rather than sophisticated tactics. Danny Rodriguez intercepted alien communications during their surveillance missions. Most of the messages were in languages that human computers could not translate, but some conversations used the same translation system that Admiral Kextall had used to speak with Jake. From these communications, Danny learned that the aliens were confident that humans would surrender long before the deadline expired. The Zephyrians talked about humanity like they were discussing a minor inconvenience. They had dealt with thousands of species over their long history, and everyone had eventually submitted to hegemony rule. The aliens could not imagine that humans would be any different, especially when faced with such overwhelming technological superiority. This attitude gave Ryan Mitchell an idea. If the aliens were so confident in their superiority, they might not be prepared for truly unexpected tactics. Humans had a long history of winning battles through clever strategies rather than superior weapons. From ancient times to modern conflicts, human armies had found ways to defeat larger and better-equipped enemies. Sophie Grant began designing ships that looked primitive on the outside but contained hidden surprises. These vessels would appear to be simple human technology, but they would carry new weapons and defenses that the aliens had never encountered. The key was to make the Zephyrians underestimate human capabilities until it was too late. The work continued day and night in shipyards and laboratories around the solar system. Scientists who had never worked together before now shared their research freely. Military officers from different nations planned joint strategies. Engineers pushed the limits of human technology to create weapons and defenses that had only existed in theory before. Alex Turner's fleet grew larger every week. By the time 6 months had passed since the alien ultimatum, Earth had more warships than ever before in human history. They were not as large or as advanced as Zephyrian vessels, but they were built with human ingenuity and determination. The new ships carried weapons that combined traditional human explosives with the exotic technologies that Ryan's team had developed. Sophie's engineering innovations allowed them to move in ways that alien computers might not predict. Each vessel was designed to keep fighting even when badly damaged, using redundant systems and damage control procedures that reflected hard lessons learned from human naval warfare. President Catherine Wells visited the shipyards regularly to encourage the workers and remind them why their efforts mattered. She spoke with pilots who would fly the new ships and soldiers who would operate the weapons. Every person involved in the project knew that they were preparing for a battle that would determine whether humanity remained free or became subjects of an alien empire. As the deadline approached, intercepted alien communications revealed that the Zephyrians were becoming impatient. Admiral Kextall had expected human resistance to collapse within months, but instead it seemed to be growing stronger. Some alien commanders suggested that they should attack immediately rather than wait for the deadline, but the Admiral insisted on following proper hegemony procedures. The aliens' confidence was beginning to show cracks. They had never encountered a species that responded to threats by working harder and becoming more united. Most intelligent races either surrendered immediately or fought brief, hopeless battles before accepting defeat. Humanity's response was unlike anything in Zephyrian experience. Jake Morrison returned from his final reconnaissance mission with important intelligence. The alien fleet had grown to over 500 ships, but they were arranged in traditional formations that suggested the Zephyrians planned to fight a conventional battle. They seemed to expect human forces to meet them in open space, where alien technological advantages would be decisive. Commander Turner smiled when he heard this report. Human military history was full of victories won by refusing to fight the enemy's preferred type of battle. If the aliens wanted a traditional space engagement, Turner would give them something completely different. His plans called for tactics that would confuse alien computers and take advantage of human creativity and adaptability. The final preparations were completed just days before the alien deadline expired. Earth's defense fleet was ready, though everyone knew it was still outnumbered and outgunned by the Zephyrian Armada. But humans had something the aliens did not expect: the absolute refusal to accept defeat and the willingness to try impossible solutions when conventional approaches failed. As President Wells made her final speech before the battle, she reminded humanity that they were fighting for more than just their planet. They were fighting for the right to determine their own destiny among the stars. No alien empire, no matter how old or powerful, had the authority to cage the human spirit. The time for talking was over, and the time for action had begun. Admiral Kextall stood on the command deck of his flagship, the massive dreadnought Eternal Dominion, and surveyed the Zephyrian armada that filled the space around him. 500 warships of the Hegemony fleet hung in perfect formation at the edge of Earth's solar system, their hulls gleaming with the cold light of distant stars. Each vessel was a masterpiece of alien engineering, carrying enough firepower to level mountains and shields that could stop the most powerful weapons known to galactic civilization. The Admiral was confident that this display of overwhelming force would finally convince the stubborn humans to surrender. In his 300 years of military service, he had never encountered a species that continued to resist after seeing the true might of the Zephyrian hegemony. The humans had been given a full galactic year to consider their position, and now the time for patience had ended. High Counselor Vexara joined Kextall on the command deck, her elegant form moving with the grace that marked all members of the Zephyrian ruling class. She had been observing human behavior through long-range sensors and quantum surveillance systems, and what she had seen troubled her. Instead of preparing for surrender, the humans had spent the entire year building weapons and warships at a pace that seemed almost frantic. Vexara expressed her concerns to the Admiral, noting that human behavior was unlike any species they had previously encountered. Most intelligent races either submitted immediately to hegemony authority or fought brief, desperate battles before accepting their fate. But the humans seemed to be approaching the conflict as if they actually believed they could win against impossible odds. Admiral Kextall dismissed these concerns with the confidence of someone who had conquered dozens of star systems. He pointed out that human technology was still centuries behind Zephyrian capabilities, and that no amount of determination could overcome such a massive technological gap. The Admiral was certain that one demonstration of hegemony power would crush human resistance, just as it had broken the will of countless other species. The Zephyrian fleet began its advance toward Earth, moving in the traditional battle formation that had proven successful in 1,000 previous conquests. The massive ships moved slowly but inexorably forward, their weapon systems charging and their shields at maximum power. Long-range sensors detected the human defense fleet moving to intercept them, and Admiral Kextall was almost disappointed by how small the enemy force appeared. Commander Alex Turner stood on the bridge of his flagship, the UES Defiance, and watched the alien armada approaching on his tactical display. The human fleet consisted of 200 ships of various sizes, from converted cargo vessels to purpose-built warships that had been completed just days before. By any reasonable measure, Turner's force was hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned by the approaching aliens. But Turner was not thinking about reasonable measures. He was thinking about every underdog victory in human military history, from ancient battles where clever tactics defeated superior numbers to modern conflicts where determination and innovation had overcome technological disadvantages. The human fleet might be smaller than the alien armada, but it carried something the Zephyrians had never faced: the accumulated tactical knowledge of a species that had been fighting wars for thousands of years. Captain Jake Morrison commanded one of the lead squadrons in Turner's fleet, flying the rebuilt and upgraded Discovery alongside newer vessels like the Resolute and the Indomitable. His pilots included Lieutenant Ben Carter, a former test pilot known for impossible maneuvers, and Major Kelly Ross, whose experience in asteroid mining had taught her to navigate in the most challenging environments. Jake's squadron had been assigned a special mission based on intelligence gathered during his reconnaissance flights. The alien ships were indeed powerful, but they seemed to rely heavily on centralized computer systems that coordinated their movements and weapons. If human forces could disrupt those systems, even briefly, it might create opportunities that superior firepower alone could not provide. The two fleets met in the space between Mars and Jupiter, where the asteroid belt provided a complex environment that favored the smaller, more maneuverable human ships. Admiral Kextall had chosen this location because he wanted to end the battle quickly, but Turner had anticipated this and positioned his forces to take advantage of the challenging terrain. The battle began when the Zephyrian fleet opened fire, with weapons that could punch through planetary crusts. Beams of pure energy lanced across space, and several human ships were destroyed in the first exchange. But the surviving vessels did not retreat or attempt to surrender as the aliens expected. Instead, they scattered into the asteroid field and began using tactics that confused the Zephyrian targeting systems. Human ships ducked behind asteroids and used the natural cover to approach alien vessels from unexpected angles. Pilots like Ben Carter performed maneuvers that pushed their ships to the breaking point, accelerating and turning in ways that alien computers had not been programmed to predict. The Zephyrians found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to follow the conventional rules of space warfare. Engineer Sophie Grant had equipped many of the human ships with experimental weapons that exploited weaknesses in alien shield technology. These weapons were not more powerful than traditional human armaments, but they operated on frequencies that Zephyrian defenses were not designed to stop. When human missiles and energy beams struck alien ships, they often caused more damage than their size suggested they should. The Zephyrians began to realize that this battle was not going according to their expectations. Admiral Kextall watched in growing frustration as his superior ships struggled to land decisive hits on the elusive human vessels. The aliens had overwhelming firepower, but they could not bring it to bear effectively against an enemy that refused to fight in predictable ways. Communications specialist Maria Gonzalez and cyber warfare expert Chris Thompson launched coordinated electronic attacks against the alien fleet. They had spent months studying Zephyrian communication protocols and had developed viruses specifically designed to disrupt alien computer networks. These attacks did not disable enemy ships, but they caused confusion and coordination problems that human forces could exploit. The battle raged across the asteroid belt for hours, with both sides taking heavy losses. Human ships were destroyed by alien weapons, but Zephyrian vessels also began to fall to coordinated attacks that targeted their vulnerable systems. The aliens discovered that human crews had an almost supernatural ability to keep fighting even. When their ships were badly damaged, Major Kelly Ross proved this point when her ship, the Tenacious, lost most of its main systems to alien fire. Instead of abandoning the vessel, Ross and her crew used emergency power to ram their crippled ship into a Zephyrian cruiser. The explosion destroyed both vessels, but it also demonstrated the kind of desperate courage that the aliens had never encountered before. High Counselor Vexara watched the battle from the Eternal Dominion and began to understand that the hegemony had made a serious error in judgment. These humans were not like other species that had challenged Zephyrian authority. They seemed to grow more determined as the battle became more desperate, and their tactical creativity was unlike anything in the galaxy. Admiral Kextal ordered his reserve forces to enter the battle, committing ships that he had planned to hold back for the final assault on Earth. The human fleet was clearly taking heavy losses, and the Admiral was confident that one more push would break their resistance. But even as Zephyrian reinforcements joined the fight, human ships continued to find new ways to strike back. Captain Morrison led a desperate charge against a group of alien heavy cruisers, using the asteroid field to approach from multiple directions simultaneously. His pilots coordinated their attacks with split-second timing, overwhelming the alien point defense systems and scoring critical hits on several enemy vessels. The maneuver cost him half his squadron, but it proved that human forces could hurt even the largest Zephyrian ships. As the battle continued, both commanders began to realize that this was no longer a simple conquest or a brief demonstration of superior force. The human fleet was fighting with a desperation and creativity that was forcing the aliens to adapt their tactics for the first time in centuries. What should have been a quick victory was turning into a costly and unpredictable struggle. Dr. Ryan Mitchell's technological innovations began to show their worth as the battle progressed. Human ships that should have been destroyed by alien weapons instead managed to survive critical hits, their improved damage control systems keeping them in the fight longer than Zephyrian computers predicted. The accumulated effect of these small advantages was beginning to shift the balance of the engagement. The aliens still had superior numbers and technology, but they were learning that humans possessed something equally valuable: the refusal to accept defeat and the ability to find hope in the most desperate situations. As the first day of battle ended with both fleets still engaged in furious combat, it became clear that this conflict would not be decided by simple mathematical calculations of firepower and defensive capability. The second day of battle began with both fleets regrouping in different parts of the asteroid belt, each side trying to understand what had happened during the previous day's fighting. Admiral Kextal reviewed the combat reports from his ship, commanders, and found information that troubled him deeply. The humans had lost more vessels than the Zephyrians, but the alien losses were far higher than any computer simulation had predicted. Commander Turner gathered his remaining ship captains for a strategy meeting aboard the Defiance. The human fleet had been reduced to about 140 operational vessels, but Turner was encouraged by what his forces had accomplished. They had proven that Zephyrian ships could be destroyed and that alien tactics could be disrupted by determined resistance and creative thinking. Captain Morrison reported on his observations of alien behavior during the first day's combat. The Zephyrians fought with impressive coordination and overwhelming firepower, but they seemed to have difficulty adapting when human forces did something unexpected. Their responses followed predictable patterns, as if their commanders were consulting instruction manuals rather than thinking creatively about each situation. Engineer Sophie Grant had been analyzing the wreckage of destroyed alien vessels, and her findings gave the human fleet new hope. The Zephyrian ships were indeed technologically superior, but their design philosophy was completely different from human engineering. Where human ships were built with multiple backup systems and damage control in mind, alien vessels relied on single, highly efficient systems that became useless when damaged. Sophie explained that Zephyrian ships were like expensive watches. Beautiful, precise, and incredibly effective when working properly, but almost impossible to repair when something went wrong. Human ships were more like farm tractors, less elegant, but designed to keep working even when half their systems were broken. This difference was becoming crucial as the battle continued. Dr. Ryan Mitchell had been monitoring the battle from Earth and transmitting tactical updates to the fleet. His analysis of alien weapon patterns revealed another important weakness. The Zephyrians used energy weapons that were devastating against traditional defenses, but these weapons required enormous amounts of power and had significant recharge times between shots. Human ships that could survive the first hit often had several seconds to strike back before the alien weapons could fire again. The second day's fighting confirmed these observations. Human ships began using hit-and-run tactics that took advantage of alien weapon recharge cycles. Pilots like Lieutenant Ben Carter and Major Kelly Ross led attacks that struck hard and fast, then retreated before the aliens could respond effectively. These tactics frustrated Zephyrian commanders who were accustomed to enemies that either stood and fought or ran away completely. Communications specialist Maria Gonzalez made a breakthrough discovery during the second day of combat. She had been monitoring alien communication frequencies and noticed that Zephyrian fleet coordination depended heavily on a central command network. When this network was disrupted, even briefly, alien ships became much less effective at working together. Maria and cyber warfare expert Chris Thompson began planning coordinated electronic attacks designed to exploit this vulnerability. Counselor Vexara spent the second day studying human tactical patterns and came to a disturbing conclusion. The humans were not just fighting desperately, they were learning and adapting at an incredible rate. Each engagement seemed to teach them something new about Zephyrian capabilities, and they incorporated these lessons into their tactics almost immediately. This kind of rapid adaptation was unprecedented in her experience. The turning point came on the third day when Captain Morrison discovered a critical flaw in Zephyrian ship design. During a close-range engagement with an alien cruiser, Morrison noticed that the enemy vessel's main systems seemed to be controlled from a single, heavily protected command center. If that center could be disabled, the entire ship would become helpless. Morrison shared this discovery with the fleet, and human forces began focusing their attacks on the command centers of alien vessels. These areas were well defended, but they were also identifiable by the unique energy signatures they produced. Human pilots started using coordinated attacks to overwhelm the defenses around these critical systems. The results were dramatic. When human forces succeeded in disabling a Zephyrian command center, the entire alien ship would lose coordination between its weapons, shields, and engines. Even if the vessel was not completely destroyed, it became easy prey for follow-up attacks. Admiral Kextal watched in horror as several of his most powerful ships were reduced to drifting hulks by human forces that should have been incapable of causing such damage. Sophie Grant worked frantically in the improvised repair bays that had been set up throughout the human fleet. She and her teams performed what seemed like miracles, bringing damaged ships back into combat when they should have been written off as total losses. Human damage control procedures were proving far superior to anything the Zephyrians had developed, allowing the fleet to maintain its strength even as individual ships took severe punishment. The psychological effect of these successes began to affect both fleets. Human crews fought with increasing confidence as they realized their tactics were working. Alien crews, who had never experienced serious resistance before, began to show signs of uncertainty and fear. Some Zephyrian ships started hanging back from combat, their commanders unwilling to risk their vessels against an enemy that had proven capable of destroying supposedly invincible warships. Admiral Kextal found himself facing a situation that no Zephyrian commander had encountered in living memory. His fleet still had superior numbers and technology, but human forces were inflicting unacceptable losses while continuing to fight with undiminished determination. The Admiral began to consider calling for reinforcements from the hegemonies, core worlds, something that would be seen as an admission of failure. The electronic warfare attacks planned by Maria Gonzalez and Chris Thompson were launched during the climax of the third day's fighting. Coordinated cyber assaults struck the Zephyrian command network at precisely the moment when human ships launched their largest attack yet. The combination of electronic disruption and physical assault overwhelmed alien defenses and resulted in the destruction of over 30 Zephyrian vessels in a single engagement. High Counselor Vexara realized that the hegemony was facing something completely new. She had studied the military history of dozens of species, but none had shown the human combination of tactical creativity, technological adaptability, and absolute refusal to surrender. The humans were not just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for principles that the Zephyrians had never encountered before. As the third day ended, Admiral Kextal made the decision that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. He sent a message to Hegemony Command requesting immediate reinforcements. The message would take months to reach the core worlds and months more for additional fleets to arrive. For the first time in his career, Kextal was admitting that he might not be able to complete his mission with the forces at hand. But the Admiral also began to consider another option that went against everything in his military training. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that could be valuable to the hegemony, and their resistance was costing the alien empire resources it could not easily replace. Perhaps it was time to consider negotiation rather than conquest, though such a suggestion would be heretical to most Zephyrian leaders. Commander Turner reviewed the status of his fleet and realized that humanity had achieved something remarkable. They had not won the war yet, but they had proven that the supposedly invincible Zephyrian hegemony could be defeated. Human ships were still outnumbered and outgunned, but they had developed tactics and technologies that could compete with alien superiority. The human crews were exhausted from 3 days of constant combat, but their morale had never been higher. They had faced the greatest military force in the known galaxy and had not only survived, but had inflicted serious damage in return. Ships that had been converted from civilian vessels were destroying alien warships that had conquered entire star systems. Captain Morrison looked out at the stars and thought about how much had changed since his first encounter with the Zephyrians. The aliens had intended to intimidate humanity into submission, but their threats had instead united the human race in a way that nothing else could have accomplished. Every person on Earth now understood that they were fighting for their freedom and their future among the stars. The battle was far from over, but the tide had clearly turned. The Zephyrians were no longer fighting a quick campaign to suppress primitive resistance. They were engaged in a real war against an enemy that grew, stronger and more dangerous with each passing day. The outcome was no longer certain, and for the first time in galactic history, the mighty hegemony faced the possibility of defeat at the hands of a species they had dismissed as inferior. As both fleets prepared for what might be the final phase of the conflict, everyone involved understood that the galaxy would never be the same, regardless of who won. The fourth day of battle found both fleets positioned near Jupiter, where the massive planet's gravitational field and radiation belts created an environment that favored neither side. Admiral Kextall had decided to make his final stand here, gambling everything on one decisive engagement that would either crush human resistance or force him to consider the unthinkable option of retreat. Commander Turner knew that this would likely be the last major battle his forces could fight. The human fleet had been reduced to fewer than 100 operational ships, and his crews were running on determination and stimulants rather than proper rest. But Turner also knew that the alien fleet had been hurt badly during the previous days of fighting, and Zephyrian morale was clearly shaken by their unexpected losses. Captain Morrison prepared his remaining squadron for what everyone understood might be a suicide mission. His orders were to penetrate the alien defensive formation and disable Admiral Kextall's flagship, the Eternal Dominion. The massive dreadnought served as the command center for the entire Zephyrian fleet, and its destruction or capture could end the battle in humanity's favor. Morrison's team included Lieutenant Sarah Johnson, whose precise flying had kept her alive through 3 days of combat, and Commander Mike Phillips, who had developed new tactics for attacking heavily defended targets. Their ships were among the fastest in the human fleet, modified with the latest improvements that Sophie Grant's engineering teams had developed. The final battle began with both fleets advancing toward each other across the space near Jupiter's largest moon. The Zephyrians came forward in their traditional formation, massive ships arranged in perfect geometric patterns that had intimidated enemies for thousands of years. The human fleet approached in loose groups that seemed almost random but were actually designed to confuse alien targeting systems. Admiral Kextall stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion and prepared for what he hoped would be the end of this costly campaign. His fleet still outnumbered the humans by more than 2 to 1, and his ships carried enough firepower to destroy planets. But the Admiral had learned to respect human tactical abilities, and he knew this battle would not be as simple as his. Original plans had suggested High Counselor Vexara had spent the night studying human military history, trying to understand how this species had developed such effective combat techniques. What she discovered amazed and frightened her. Humans had been fighting wars for their entire recorded history, developing tactics and strategies through thousands of years of constant conflict. They brought this accumulated knowledge to space warfare in ways that peaceful species like the Zephyrians could not match. The engagement began with long-range weapons fire as both fleets tested each other's defenses. Human ships used evasive maneuvers that took advantage of Jupiter's gravitational field, accelerating and turning in ways that made them difficult targets. Zephyrian vessels relied on their superior shields and weapons, expecting to win through overwhelming firepower as they had in every previous battle. Communications specialist Maria Gonzalez and cyber warfare expert Chris Thompson launched their most sophisticated electronic attack yet, targeting the command networks that coordinated the alien fleet. The virus they had developed was specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in Zephyrian computer systems, and its effects were immediate and dramatic. Alien ships suddenly found themselves unable to coordinate their movements or share targeting information. Vessels that had fought in perfect harmony for 3 days began bumping into each other and firing at empty space. The Zephyrian formation collapsed as individual ship commanders tried to fight independently without the central coordination they had always relied upon. Captain Morrison saw his opportunity and led his squadron in a desperate charge toward the Eternal Dominion. The massive flagship was surrounded by escort vessels and defensive platforms, but the electronic warfare attack had disrupted their ability to work together effectively. Morrison's ships accelerated to dangerous speeds, using Jupiter's gravity to boost their velocity beyond what their engines could normally achieve. Lieutenant Sarah Johnson's ship was the first to break through the alien defensive perimeter, her precise flying allowing her to thread between Zephyrian vessels that were too confused to coordinate their fire. Commander Mike Phillips followed close behind, his ship's experimental weapons systems targeting the weak points that human intelligence had identified in the flagship's design. The assault on the Eternal Dominion was a desperate gamble that succeeded. Through a combination of careful planning and incredible courage, Morrison's squadron concentrated their fire on the Dreadnought's command center, using the tactics they had developed during the previous days of fighting. The alien ship's defenses were formidable, but they had been designed to stop traditional attacks rather than the innovative assault methods that humans had developed. Admiral Kextall watched in disbelief as human ships penetrated his flagship's defenses and began causing critical damage to essential systems. The Eternal Dominion was the most powerful warship in the Zephyrian fleet, equipped with technology that represented thousands of years of advancement. Yet these primitive human vessels were systematically destroying its most important components. The breakthrough came when Commander Phillips managed to disable the flagship's main computer core, the system that controlled everything from weapons to life support. Without this central brain, the Eternal Dominion became a helpless giant, its massive size and powerful weapons useless without the coordination systems needed to use them effectively. Engineer Sophie Grant had been monitoring the battle from her position aboard the Defiance, and she realized that the disabled flagship represented an incredible opportunity. If human forces could capture the Eternal Dominion intact, they would gain access to Zephyrian technology that could revolutionize human capabilities. Sophie transmitted detailed instructions to Morrison's squadron, explaining how to board and secure the alien vessel. The boarding action that followed was unlike anything in human military history. Human Marines used cutting tools and explosives to force their way into the massive alien ship, fighting through corridors designed for beings twice their size. The Zephyrian crew, trained for space warfare but not for hand-to-hand combat, offered surprisingly little resistance to the human assault. Admiral Kextall found himself facing armed humans in his own command center, a situation so unprecedented that he had no protocols for dealing with it. The Admiral had spent his entire career commanding fleets that conquered star systems, but he had never been in personal danger during any of those campaigns. Faced with weapons pointed at him by determined human soldiers, Kextall made the decision to surrender his flagship. High Counselor Vex Ara, monitoring the situation from her position on a nearby cruiser, realized that the unthinkable had happened. The Zephyrian hegemony's most powerful warship had been captured by a species that the aliens had dismissed as primitive and inferior. The psychological impact of this defeat would resonate throughout the galaxy, encouraging other species to question hegemony authority. With their flagship captured and their command network disrupted, the remaining Zephyrian forces found themselves unable to continue fighting effectively. Individual ship commanders began requesting permission to withdraw, and some vessels simply fled the battle without waiting for orders. The disciplined fleet that had arrived to crush human resistance was dissolving into a disorganized mob of confused and demoralized ships. High Counselor Vexara made the decision that saved what remained of the Zephyrian fleet. She transmitted a general surrender order to all alien vessels, acknowledging defeat and requesting negotiations with the human commanders. This was the first time in recorded galactic history that a hegemony fleet had surrendered to an enemy, but Vexara understood that continued fighting would only result in more unnecessary losses. President Catherine Wells received the news of victory while meeting with world leaders in the emergency command center that had been established beneath the United Nations building. The report seemed almost impossible to believe. Humanity's hastily assembled defense fleet had not only survived the alien assault, but had actually defeated the mighty Zephyrian hegemony. The room erupted in celebrations that quickly spread around the world. Commander Turner accepted the alien surrender aboard his flagship, treating the defeated Zephyrians with the respect due to honorable enemies. The human commander understood that this victory was just the beginning of a new chapter in galactic history, and he wanted to establish precedents that would serve humanity well in the years to come. The capture of Admiral Kextal and the Eternal. Dominion provided humanity with incredible opportunities. Dr. Ryan Mitchell led teams of scientists who studied Zephyrian technology, learning advances that would have taken humans centuries to develop on their own. The alien computer systems contained star charts showing the locations of hundreds of inhabited worlds and detailed information about galactic civilization. News of the human victory spread throughout the galaxy at the speed of light, carried by automated communication networks that the Zephyrians had established to coordinate their empire.